The Stridsvagn 103, shortly Strv 103, was one of the most unusual tanks ever built in the First Cold War period. This turretless tank caused many disputations. It was a brilliant design for some, yet many others have claimed that the turretless tank concept was freaky and useless. Now, we're investigating the Strv 103, the way out, and legendary Swedish tank. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel before we start, and give us a thumbs up if you like our video. To be notified of our new video, please click the bell button. A little note before we get started. We may have slightly lost our neutrality in this video about the Strv 103, which we absolutely love as a whole team. So, we ask for your sympathy and understanding. The Strv 103 was one of the Swedish out-of-the-box weapon systems developed during the First Cold War. In this era, no other country had used such a tank. Yes, there were some vehicles, such as the Soviet ASU-57 and ASU-85, and the German Jagdpanzerkanone 90mm. But they were assault guns, not a turretless tank. To explain this distinction better, first, let's look at the historical and geographical factors that paved the way for the development of the Strv 103. The mass production capability and manpower had decided the winning side of the Second World War. In the conventional phase of the possible Third World War, both NATO and the Warsaw Pact was still relying on their massive production capabilities and manpower. However, Sweden had a small population but a large territory with many water obstacles. Relying on numerical superiority was not an option for this country. In the early 1950s, with its powerful gun and thick armor, the Soviet IS-3 was a major concern for Western countries. In those years, the Swedish Army was still operating the British Centurions, designed for the requirement of the Second World War conditions. Therefore, they began to seek a tank which has better protection, firepower, and mobility. At first, Sweden began to work on a tank called the EMIL with an oscillating turret. But this design had made the tank high and expensive. After a while, the Swedish Army staff and engineers carefully studied the combat reports of the Second World War and the Korean War. It was obvious that increasing the tank's height also increased the risk of being hit. More than half of the tanks had been knocked out because their turrets had been penetrated. So, they decided that the height of the new tank must be as low as possible. Therefore, a radical solution emerged, eliminating the turret. This design was lighter, yet offering better armor protection. So, Sweden terminated the EMIL project. In fact, it was not an innovative idea to design an armored combat vehicle without a turret. During the Second World War, both sides developed many assault guns. However, these vehicles were defensive systems used individually or in small groups. They were laying an ambush in the areas attacked by the enemy and waiting for their prey. In offense, they were usually conducting fire support missions for the infantry or flank protection for attacking forces. However, using some innovative technologies, Sweden intended to use this new vehicle in large groups within armored brigades for offensive purposes. That's why the Strv 103 was not an assault gun, but a turretless tank. Of course, a turretless tank had to stop first to fire accurately. But in those years, other conventional tanks had to stop too, because none of them had turret stabilization systems. So, a turretless design had no particular disadvantage in terms of firing accuracy. In 1958, Sweden approved to build 2 prototypes. 2 years later, the Swedish Army ordered 10 additional pre-production versions of the new tank called the Strv 103. The Strv is the abbreviation of Stridsvagn, which means combat vehicle in Swedish. The 103 indicates that it was the third tank armed with a 10 cm gun in the Swedish Army service. The Strv 101 was the service name of the Centurion Mark 10 with a 105mm gun. Sweden also had 160 Centurion Mark 5s with an 84mm gun. Later, 81 of these tanks were fitted with a 105mm gun and renamed as the Strv-102. The serial production of the Strv-103 began in 1967. The three-person crew of the Strv-103 consisted of a commander, driver-gunner, and radio operator rear driver. The tank was 8.99 meters long, 3.63 meters wide, and 2.14 meters high. The combat weight was 39.7 tons. The B version of the tank had one 240 brake horsepower Rolls-Royce K60 multi-fuel engine and one 490 shaft horsepower Caterpillar 553 gas turbine. It had a maximum road speed of 50 kilometers per hour. The range was 390 kilometers. All versions of the Strv-103 had hydropneumatic suspensions. It could negotiate 0.9 meter vertical steps, 2.3 meter trenches, and could ford to a depth of 1.5 meters. But with preparation, the tank could swim with a water speed of 6 kilometers per hour. The Strv-103 had a 105mm 62 caliber rifled main gun and three 7.62mm KPS-58 machine guns, which is the Swedish variant of the Belgian FN Mag. The first production vehicles was the Strv-103A, which had a Boeing GT502 gas turbine. However, the performance of this gas turbine was insufficient. For this reason, the production of the B model started shortly after. The Strv-103B had both the flotation screen and the dozer blade. The A version tanks were subsequently modernized to B standard. Not all Strv-103Bs had dozer blades. One tank in each platoon had this attachment under the front hull. The Strv-103C had a similar dimension to its predecessor, but its combat weight was 42.5 tons. Also, this version was equipped with the 290 horsepower Detroit Diesel 6V53T diesel engine instead of the Rolls-Royce K60 multi-fuel engine. It had a new 3-step automatic main gearbox and two 71mm Lyran motor and laser rangefinder. There was also a D version which never became operational. The Strv-103 had a fixed gun. This gun was being rotated by the rotation of the hull and being elevated by the inclination given to the hull using hydropneumatic suspension. Therefore, naturally the driver was also the gunner. The radio operator seated to the rear of the driver and controls the drive backwards if required. Thanks to this feature, the Strv-103 could easily conduct hit-and-run attacks and escape from the combat area. The commander seated slightly in the rear of the radio operator. His sight system was fully stabilized in elevation between -11 to +16 degrees. The commander's cupola could traverse through 208 degrees. All the periscopes and sights on the Strv-103 had armored shutters. These shutters were providing some protection to the periscopes against shell splinters. Besides, they were preventing the reflection of light from the glasses. There was a hull escape hatch in the fighting compartment. The 105mm main gun was basically a longer version of the British L7. It had a bore evacuator but no muzzle brake. The Strv-103 had the autoloader. A magazine at the rear of the hull was holding 50 rounds in 10 racks. In a typical mission, the Strv-103 was carrying 25 armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot, 20 high-explosive, and 5 smoke rounds. The theoretical maximum firing rate of the gun was 24 rounds per minute, but the practical firing rate was 15 rounds per minute. It means that the tank could fire its main gun every 4 seconds. This was a very impressive capability at that time. The other tanks of that time had to wait 8 to 10 seconds for each fire. Relying on the tank's rapid fire capability, the crew could secure to hit the target by one short, one medium, and one long shot in a short time. The crew could reload the magazines through 2 hatches at the rear in about 10 minutes. Many viewers may think that the turretless Strv-103 had worse tracking capability for moving targets than the tanks with a turret. This would be a wrong assumption. For example, in those years, The turret of the Leopard 1 had a rotation speed of 37.55 degrees per second. But the STRV-103 could turn its entire hull 90 degrees between 1 to 2 seconds, depending on the terrain. There were two fixed 7.62mm KSP-58 machine guns on the left side of the hull as a coaxial weapon. The crew had to leave the armor protection to reload them. The Lorand mortars were being used to fire flares to eliminate battlefields and targets. The STRV-103 had a combined diesel and gas engine configuration similar to a warship. The tank was using its diesel engine when it went to the mission area and during aiming. For higher speeds and maneuverability, the gas turbine was being engaged. The hydropneumatic suspension system was providing good maneuverability. During the fire, these suspensions were being locked. By erecting the flotation screen, which was carried around the top of the hull, the STRV-103 could swim. This process usually took 15 to 20 minutes. The driver, who stands on top at the rear, was using remote throttle control and steering the swimming STRV-103 by reins attached to the main tiller. At first glance, you may think that there were some additional armor packages on both sides of the hull, but it is not true. These blocks were actually fuel cans. During mobilization, the tank was being fitted with 18 fuel cans, each containing 22 liters of fuel. Luckily, Sweden had never used the STRV-103 in real combat, but the tank tested its abilities in many international trials. In these trials, the STRV-103 proved its superior observation capability and reliability. Many sources confirmed that this turretless tank was equal to or even better than other tanks with a turret in some aspects. Well, if the STRV-103 was a good tank, why did other countries not embrace this concept or adapt it? Yes, the STRV-103 was an advantageous tank in the 1960s, but it had some disadvantages too. The complex mechanical components of the tank were fairly reliable. But if a malfunction occurred, it was difficult to repair the STRV-103. The glacis plate and the main armament had to be removed to reach the power pack, and this was taking nearly 4 hours. The fuel consumption of the gas turbine was extremely high, so when the STRV-103 cruised with top speed, its range was decreasing dramatically. Hydropneumatic suspension was an expensive technology in those years. The STRV-103's length of track on the ground was 2.85 meters. So, it had a 1.04 kilogram per centimeter square ground pressure. The number was 1.17 for the C version. This was high. For example, the Leopard 1 had 0.88 kilograms per centimeter square ground pressure, while the Centurion had 0.95. The STRV-103's performance in muddy terrain was naturally low. Although it was developed for use in a possible war with the USSR, the STRV-103 did not have an NBC system. But the real problems occurred a decade later. In the 1970s, the turret stabilization system had reached maturity. Thanks to this system, the tanks with a turret could engage the enemy while they were on the move. This time, the turretless design caused a real disadvantage. Long story short, the STRV-103 fell behind the new technology shortly after becoming operational. Nevertheless, it still held up till 1997. Then, the STRV-122s, which are the Swedish version of the Leopard 2A5, replaced the STRV-103s. We will never know how the STRV-103 would perform in a real war. But undoubtedly, it was one of the most fascinating and handsome tanks of all times. It was designed according to the special conditions of Sweden. This fact made the tank unique from its counterparts in the world. So, the STRV-103 still managed to become a legend. Thanks for watching our video. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up if you liked our video. To be notified of our new videos, please click the bell button.